Getting kidnapped by my cab driver is the only reason I'm still alive. Here is the corrected story. The Driver. A thriller. Getting kidnapped by my cab driver is the only reason I'm still alive. I landed at JFK at 11:47 p.m. after a 3-day conference in Seattle. The cab was already waiting, a black sedan with tinted windows. The driver held a sign with my name spelled perfectly, Catherine Hoffman. She was quiet at first, asked about my flight, commented on the rain, normal things that normal drivers say. Then she drove past the exit from my neighborhood. "You missed the turn," I said. "It was back there." She kept driving like I hadn't spoken. "Hey," I raised my voice. "I said you missed." Every door locked at once. That thick, mechanical sound that meant I was trapped. I grabbed the handle and pulled. Nothing. I yanked out my phone and her hand shot back between the seats, snatching it before I could unlock the screen. "Let me out!" I screamed, slamming my palms against the window. "Someone help me!" She merged onto the highway heading north, away from everything. I kicked at the window until my heel broke. The glass didn't crack. "Please." I was sobbing now. "I have a daughter. She's only 7. Please." Her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. Something shifted in her face. We drove in silence for 23 minutes. I counted everyone. Finally, she pulled into an industrial district. Empty warehouses, broken streetlights, the kind of place bodies get found months later. She parked behind a building with no windows and turned to face me. "I need you to look at something." Her hands were shaking. "Please, just look." She held up her phone. On the screen, photographs of my house, my car in the driveway, my office building, me walking to my car last Tuesday, wearing the blue blazer I'd bought for Seattle. Someone had been watching me for weeks. She scrolled through text messages and my blood turned to ice. "I was hired to pick you up tonight," she said quietly. "But not as a cab driver." The messages were explicit, clinical. Target, Catherine Hoffman, 38. Flight UA 847, arriving 11:40 p.m. Make it look like robbery gone wrong. Half now, half after confirmation. "I'm supposed to kill you," she said. That was the job. I couldn't breathe. "Who hired you?" She turned the phone toward me. The contact name read, M.A. Hoffman, Michael, my husband. "No." I shook my head. "We've been married 12 years. He would never read the messages." I read them. All of them. Michael had been planning this for 6 weeks. He'd taken out a $2 bill. $3 million life insurance policy on me in March, forging my signature. He'd specifically requested tonight because he was at a conference in Chicago. Keynote speaker, 300 witnesses, airtight alibi. The most recent message, she lands at 11:40. "Text me when it's done. Don't contact me again after." "Why didn't you do it?" I whispered. The driver's jaw tightened. "I went to your office yesterday. There were photos on your desk. You and a little girl at a beach. Matching swimsuits." Her voice cracked. "My daughter's 7 too. I couldn't make her grow up like mine would have to." I thought about all the signs I'd missed. Michael's sudden interest in my travel schedule. The way he'd encouraged me to take this trip, practically packed my suitcase himself. What do? I can't call the police." "No." Her voice sharpened. "Your husband requested a specific detective handle any investigation. Frank Harris, 23rd Precinct. 3 internal affairs complaints, all dismissed. He's on your husband's payroll." She pulled up security footage. Live feed, my living room. A man in dark clothing standing by the front door, waiting. "That's your house right now. Your husband sent someone else when I didn't check in." My daughter was at my mother's this weekend. Michael had suggested it. "Let your mom take Sophie. Have some time to yourself when you get back." He'd planned everything. "I have all the evidence," the driver said. "Messages, payment records. He used cryptocurrency, but I traced it to an account in his name. Enough to bury him." Then we go to the FBI. Someone outside his reach. "There's a field office 40 minutes from here. But Catherine, the moment you walk in there, your old life is over. Michael will know you survived. He'll run or send more people." I looked at the footage. The man in my living room checked his watch, then settled into a chair. Patient, professional, 12 years of marriage. A daughter who called him daddy. 1,000 ordinary moments that now felt like camouflage for something monstrous. "Drive," I said. "Where?" "The FBI, and then we're going to destroy him." The driver put the car in gear. "One more thing," she said. "The person your husband hired before me, the one who turned him down and gave him my name," she paused. It was Detective Harris. The FBI building looked small from the parking lot, just glass doors and a lit-up sign that said Federal Bureau of Investigation in boring letters. Naomi parked the car and turned off the engine. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I tried to grab the door handle 3 times before I could actually pull it. The cold air hit me when I got out, and I realized I was still wearing the blazer from Seattle, the one Michael had watched me pack. Naomi walked next to me across the empty parking lot. She had her phone in her hand, the one with all the messages that proved my husband wanted me dead. We reached the glass doors and I stopped moving. Once we went inside, everything would change. Michael would find out I survived. He might run. He might send more people. Naomi looked at me and nodded once, then pushed the door open. The receptionist sat behind thick glass at a desk covered in papers and coffee cups. She looked tired, the kind of tired you get from working nights when normal people are sleeping. I walked up to the glass and tried to make my voice work. She looked up at me with this expression like she'd heard every crazy story already tonight. I told her we needed to see an agent right now, that someone tried to kill me, that we had proof. She didn't move, just stared at us like we might be drunk or high or making stuff up for attention. Then Naomi held up her phone and showed her the screen. The messages. The ones about making it look like a robbery. The receptionist's face changed completely. She picked up her phone and started talking fast to someone. 5 minutes later, we were sitting in a conference room with white walls and a big table and chairs that squeaked when you moved. A man came in wearing jeans and a shirt that looked like he'd thrown it on in a hurry. He had dark hair and tired eyes and a badge on his belt. Special Agent Tristan Coffey. He shook our hands and sat down across from us. I started talking. The words came out messy and wrong, jumping around between Michael and the insurance policy and the cab ride and the man waiting in my house right now. Tristan's face didn't show anything. He just watched me like he was trying to figure out if I was telling the truth or completely insane. Naomi didn't wait for him to decide. She put her phone on the table and slid it across to him. He picked it up and started reading. I watched his eyes move across the screen, reading the messages between her and my husband about how to kill me. His jaw got tight. He scrolled down to the payment records, the cryptocurrency transfers, the screenshots of the forged insurance policy. His face went hard like stone. He stood up and left the room without saying anything. When Tristan came back, he had 2 other agents with him and a woman carrying a laptop. The woman sat down and opened her computer. She was the forensic accountant, someone who could trace money and figure out if the payments were real. She took Naomi's phone and started typing. The other agents asked questions. Where did the money come from? What account? When did the transfers happen? Naomi answered everything without stopping. She knew all the details because she'd been the one receiving the payments. The accountant's fingers moved fast across her keyboard. She pulled up records and charts and numbers I didn't understand. After an hour, she looked at Tristan and nodded. The payments were real. The cryptocurrency came from an account in Michael's name. Everything Naomi had shown us was true. They separated us after that. One agent took Naomi to a different room. Tristan stayed with me. He asked questions for 2 hours straight. When did I get married? How did Michael act lately? Did I notice anything strange? Did I know about the insurance policy? I told him everything I could remember. Michael getting interested in my travel schedule. The way he'd packed my suitcase for Seattle himself. How he suggested Sophie stay with my mother this weekend. The insurance policy I never signed. The one with my forged signature that was worth $2.3 million. Tristan wrote everything down in a notebook, filling up page after page. I told him about Michael's conference in Chicago, how he'd been so excited about being the keynote speaker. 300 witnesses to prove he was nowhere near New York when I was supposed to die. Tristan left the room and came back with a laptop. He set it on the table and turned it toward me. The screen showed my living room, my couch, my coffee table with Sophie's coloring book still on it, and a man sitting in my chair, the backup killer. He was still there, still waiting. He checked his watch, then leaned back and closed his eyes like he had all the time in the world. Tristan made a phone call. I heard him talking to someone about sending a tactical team. Armed agents, my address, immediate apprehension. He hung up and looked at me. The team was already moving. They'd have the man in custody within the hour. I watched through the conference room window as agents in dark uniforms loaded into big black vehicles. They had guns and vests and helmets. They drove away fast with lights flashing. Naomi sat in another room across the hall. I could see her through the glass talking to a different agent. She looked small and scared. Our eyes met for just a second. 2 women who didn't know each other yesterday. 2 women whose lives got connected because one of us was supposed to kill the other one. The strangest thing in the world. 40 minutes later, Tristan's phone rang. He answered it and listened. Then he nodded and hung up. They got him. The backup killer was in custody. No shots fired, no problems. They found a knife in his jacket, zip ties in his pocket, the kind of things you bring when you're planning to hurt someone. He asked for a lawyer right away and stopped talking. But they didn't need him to talk. They found his phone, text messages from Michael, my address, the instruction to make it look like a robbery. Everything they needed to prove Michael sent him. Tristan sat down across from me again. He explained what was happening now. They were opening a full investigation. Not just into Michael. Into Frank Harris, too, the corrupt cop who was supposed to cover everything up. Into the criminal network that connected Michael to people who kill for money. This was federal now. Wire fraud because Michael used electronic payments. Conspiracy to commit murder because he hired multiple people. Corruption of a law enforcement officer because of Harris. The charges were piling up and Michael didn't even know it yet. The sun started coming up outside. Tristan told me they were moving me somewhere safe. A place the FBI used for witnesses who needed protection. I couldn't go home. The man who'd been sitting in my living room knew what I looked like. Other people might know too. Michael might send more people when he figured out his plan failed. 2 agents drove me to an apartment building that looked completely normal from the outside. Plain brick, regular windows, nothing special. Inside was different. Security cameras everywhere. Locked doors that needed special cards to open. They took me to the 3rd floor and opened apartment 3F. It was small and bland. Beige walls, brown furniture, nothing personal anywhere. This was where I'd be staying until they arrested Michael. Until they figured out if I was safe. They gave me a prepaid phone with only a few numbers programmed in. Tristan's number, the FBI office, emergency services. That was it. 2 agents stationed themselves outside my door in the hallway. I was safe. I was alone. My old life was over. I picked up the prepaid phone at 5:58 a.m. and stared at my mother's number. My hands shook so bad I had to put the phone down on the table and take 3 deep breaths. Sophie would be waking up soon for school. Mom would be making her breakfast. Normal morning things that weren't normal anymore. I dialed. She answered on the 2nd ring. I told her there was an emergency and she needed to keep Sophie home from the school today. My voice came out steady somehow, like I was talking about a dentist appointment instead of my husband trying to murder me. Mom went quiet for 3 seconds. Then she asked what kind of emergency. I heard the fear starting in her voice even though I was trying so hard to hide mine. She knew something was really wrong. She demanded to know what happened. I looked at the bland beige walls of the safe house apartment. The 2 agents were outside my door. Tristan was probably awake by now reviewing evidence. Michael was in Chicago sleeping in a hotel bed, waiting for confirmation that I was dead. I told Mom everything. The cab driver who was supposed to kill me. The messages from Michael planning my murder. The life insurance policy with my forged signature. The backup killer who'd been sitting in my living room waiting. Mom didn't say anything while I talked. Complete silence on the other end except for her breathing. When I finished, I heard her start to cry. Not loud sobbing. Just these quiet, broken sounds like something inside her chest had cracked. She asked how Michael could do this to us. How could he do this to Sophie? We'd had Sunday dinners at their house every week for 12 years. He'd called her Mom. He'd helped my dad fix the back deck last summer. She promised to keep Sophie safe. She said she wouldn't tell Sophie anything yet because 7 was too young to understand that your father hired people to kill your mother. I heard Sophie's voice in the background asking who Mommy was talking to. Mom told her it was work stuff and went back to making breakfast like the world hadn't just exploded. We hung up and I sat there holding the dead phone. The sun was coming up outside the window. Somewhere in Chicago, Michael was probably checking his phone to see if Naomi had texted him yet. At 9:15 a.m., someone knocked on my door. One of the agents checked through the peephole, then let in a woman carrying a laptop bag. She introduced herself as the forensic accountant assigned to Michael's case. She sat down at the small kitchen table and opened her computer. What she showed me made everything make horrible sense. Michael had gambling debts, not small ones. Over $400,000 owed to various casinos and some private individuals who weren't the kind of people you wanted chasing you for money. His business had been failing for a year. He'd been hiding the losses from me, moving money between accounts to make everything look fine. The life insurance money would have cleared all his debts and left him with almost $2 million. Plus, he'd get sympathy as the grieving husband. The accountant showed me bank statements and credit card bills I'd never seen. Trips to Atlantic City I didn't know about. Online poker accounts. Sports betting sites. He'd been bleeding money for months while I thought we were doing fine. She pointed to March on the timeline. That's when he took out the insurance policy on me. Forged my signature on the application. Started planning how to solve all his problems by making me disappear. The accountant closed her laptop and looked at me. She said Michael had been desperate. That made him dangerous but also sloppy. He'd left a clear trail because he was rushing. She gathered her things and left. I sat there thinking about all the times Michael said he was working late, all the business trips that maybe weren't business, all the moments I trusted him completely while he was planning to have me killed. Tristan came by around noon. He sat across from me in the safe house living room and explained the plan. Michael didn't know I survived. That was their advantage. They were monitoring his phone and had agents watching him in Chicago. They wanted to use the time before he figured out his plan failed to gather more evidence. They were tracking who he called, who he texted, whether he tried to contact Naomi or the backup killer or anyone else. Every move Michael made was recorded. Tristan said they needed to be careful. Michael had resources and connections. If they moved too fast, he might run or destroy evidence. If they waited too long, he might figure out I was alive and try again with someone else. The timing had to be perfect. I asked how long I had to stay in the safe house. Tristan said probably 2 days. They'd let Michael fly home from Chicago tomorrow like nothing was wrong. Then they'd arrest him at our house when he discovered I wasn't dead. They wanted his genuine reaction. They wanted to see if he contacted Frank or tried to flee. They wanted to catch him in the act of realizing his murder plan had failed. I thought about Michael walking into our empty house tomorrow, looking for my body, calling Naomi's number over and over, the panic setting in when he understood something went wrong. Tristan stood up to leave. He told me to try to rest. Easy for him to say. I turned on the television because the silence was making me crazy. Some talk show was on. People were laughing about something. I couldn't focus on what they were saying. My husband was 300 miles away giving his keynote speech right now, probably checking his phone between sessions, waiting for Naomi to text him that I was dead, probably planning what he'd say when the police called to tell him his wife had been murdered, the performance he'd give, the tears he'd cry. I thought about the speech he was giving, whatever business topic he was an expert on. 300 people watching him, thinking he was successful and smart and normal. None of them knowing he'd paid someone $50,000 to kill his wife last night. The room started feeling too small. My chest got tight. I couldn't breathe right. The walls were too close. I stood up and paced between the kitchen and living room. 5 steps one way, 5 steps back. The agents outside my door probably thought I was losing it. Maybe I was. This was supposed to be a normal weekend. I was supposed to come home from Seattle and spend Sunday with Sophie, make pancakes, watch her favorite movie, normal mom things. Instead, I was hiding in a safe house while the FBI built a case against my husband for trying to murder me. The breathing got worse. I sat down on the floor with my back against the wall, put my head between my knees, counted to 10 over and over until the panic passed. By 12:30 p.m., Tristan called my prepaid phone. Michael had started calling Naomi's number. Not just once. Over and over. 8 calls in 20 minutes. The FBI had her phone and was watching every call come in. They were recording everything. Michael's increasing panic as Naomi didn't answer, as the confirmation he was waiting for never came. Tristan said Michael left 3 voicemails, each one more anxious than the last. The first one was casual, just checking in. The second one was concerned. Is everything okay? The third one was barely controlled panic. Call me back immediately. The FBI was analyzing the voicemails for anything they could use in court. Every word Michael said was digging his grave deeper. I asked Tristan what happens if Michael figures out I'm alive. If he realizes his plan failed and runs. Tristan said they had agents watching him. If Michael tried to leave Chicago early or go anywhere except the airport tomorrow, they'd arrest him immediately. They weren't taking chances. But they wanted to give him rope. See who else he contacted. See if he tried to reach out to Frank or anyone else involved. Michael called Naomi's number 3 more times while I was on the phone with Tristan. No voicemails this time. Just desperate calls that went straight to voicemail. I imagined him in his hotel room, pacing, checking his phone, wondering why his hired killer wasn't responding, wondering if something went wrong, not knowing that everything went wrong in the best possible way. Tristan came back to the safe house later that afternoon. He sat down and told me about Naomi. She was in federal custody while they figured out what charges she'd face. She had a record, other crimes from her past, but she was cooperating fully now, answering every question, giving them names and details about the criminal network that connected her to Michael. Her testimony would be crucial for the trial. I asked Tristan if I could talk to her. He said no, not until after everything was over. I told him I had complicated feelings about Naomi. She saved my life. She chose Sophie over money. But she was still someone who agreed to kill a stranger for $50,000. She was still someone who'd done this before, probably. Tristan said people were complicated. Naomi had done bad things, but she made the right choice when it mattered. That didn't erase her past, but it counted for something. He said Naomi asked about me, asked if I was okay, asked if Sophie was safe. She seemed genuinely worried. I didn't know what to do with that information. The woman hired to murder me was worried about my well-being. Nothing about this situation made sense. A new person arrived at 4 p.m. A sharp business suit, leather briefcase. She introduced herself as Skylar Quinn, assistant U.S. attorney. She was handling Michael's prosecution. She sat down and got right to business. No small talk, no sympathy, just facts. Michael would face federal charges for wire fraud because he used electronic payments to hire Naomi. Conspiracy to commit murder because he planned and paid for my death. Insurance fraud for the forged policy. The state would file attempted murder charges separately. Between federal and state charges, Michael was looking at decades in prison if convicted. Probably life. Skylar asked me questions about my marriage, about Michael's behavior, about whether I suspected anything. I told her everything I could remember. She took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she closed her notebook and looked at me. She said the evidence was strong. Messages, payments, cryptocurrency trails, the backup killer's testimony. Michael's lawyer would try to argue he never meant to go through with it, that he was just talking. But the multiple payments and multiple hired killers destroyed that defense. Skylar said trials were unpredictable, but she was confident. I asked her what happens next. She said they'd arrest Michael tomorrow morning, process him, arraign him, then we'd start building toward trial. It would take months, maybe a year. I needed to be prepared for a long fight. Tristan pulled up something on his laptop and turned it toward me. Security footage from our house, surveillance photos, bank records, flight information. Michael had researched everything, my exact flight number and arrival time, the route from JFK to our house. He'd paid Naomi $50,000 up front through cryptocurrency. Another $50,000 was supposed to come after confirmation of my death. He'd given Naomi my photo, my schedule, my address. Everything she needed to find me and kill me. The messages between them were cold and businesslike. No emotion, just logistics. Make it look like a robbery. No witnesses. Text confirmation after. Frank was supposed to handle the investigation if anything went wrong. Steer it away from Michael. Close it as a random crime. Every detail had been planned except one thing: Naomi's conscience. Tristan showed me more evidence. Michael had been researching life insurance policies for months. He'd looked up how long you had to wait after taking out a policy before you could collect. He'd researched how murder investigations worked, what made someone a suspect, how to build an alibi. He'd thought of everything, except that the person he hired might choose not to kill me. Skylar leaned forward. She said they were going to let Michael return home from Chicago tomorrow as planned. He'd take his scheduled flight, land at JFK, take a car service home, walk into our house expecting it to be empty, expecting to get a call from police about finding my body. Instead, FBI agents would be waiting. They'd arrest him in our kitchen, in the house where he'd planned my murder. They wanted his genuine reaction on camera, wanted to see if he tried to call Frank or run, wanted to catch him in the moment he realized everything had fallen apart. I asked what I should do. Skylar said stay here, stay safe, let them handle Michael. After the arrest, I could go home with protection, start figuring out my next steps, file for divorce, get a restraining order, whatever I needed. She packed up her briefcase and stood. She told me to try to get some rest. Tomorrow was going to be a long day. After she left, I sat in the safe house watching the sun go down. Tomorrow morning, Michael would be arrested. Tomorrow morning, my 12-year marriage would officially end. Tomorrow morning, everything would change again. I spent the night in the safe house staring at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. My mind kept replaying 12 years of marriage. Every anniversary dinner, every vacation photo. Every morning, Michael kissed me goodbye before work. I kept searching for signs I'd missed. Warning signals that my husband wanted me dead. The forensic accountant had found something that made my stomach hurt. Michael started planning this the same month he forged my signature on the insurance policy. March, 6 months ago. He'd been living with me for half a year, waiting for the right moment to have me killed. Sharing our bed, playing with Sophie, acting like a normal husband while secretly arranging my murder. I wondered how many times he'd looked at me and thought about the money. How many conversations we'd had where he was already spending my life insurance in his head. The safe house was too quiet. Every creak made me jump. I kept checking the door to make sure it was locked. Around 4 in the morning, I finally dozed off sitting up on the couch. Someone knocked on the door at 7:30. I jerked awake, heart pounding. Tristan's voice came through. He told me they were moving into position at my house. Michael's flight would land in 2 hours. I followed him to a command center they'd set up in another room. Laptops everywhere. Agents wearing headsets. Security feeds showing multiple angles of my house and street. Tristan pointed to a screen. Unmarked cars were already parking on my block. Agents dressed like normal people walking dogs or checking mailboxes. My home looked like any other suburban house on a Tuesday morning. Except federal agents were hiding everywhere, waiting to arrest my husband for trying to murder me. The whole scene felt wrong. That was my house. The place where Sophie learned to walk, where we'd hosted birthday parties and Christmas dinners. Now it was a crime scene, a trap. I watched agents check their equipment and communicate through earpieces. This was really happening. In a few hours, Michael would walk through that front door expecting me to be dead. The laptop showed 10:23 a.m. when a taxi pulled into our driveway. My breath caught. Michael got out carrying his conference bag. He looked exactly like he always did coming home from a business trip. Khaki pants, blue button-down shirt, the same jacket he'd worn 100 times. He paid the driver and walked up to the front door. I leaned closer to the screen. Michael unlocked the door and stepped inside. His voice came through the audio feed calling my name. Catherine. Then again, louder. Catherine, I'm home. He sounded normal, casual, like a husband greeting his wife. But I wasn't there. I was supposed to be dead in a morgue somewhere. He was expecting Detective Harris to call any minute with news about finding my body. Michael walked through the living room into the kitchen. His head turned like he was looking for something, or someone, the backup killer. The man Michael had sent to finish the job after Naomi didn't respond. Tristan spoke quietly beside me. He told me they'd arrested the backup killer 12 hours ago. Michael didn't know that yet. I watched my husband's confusion play out on the grainy surveillance footage. Michael pulled out his phone and started dialing. His fingers moved fast, frantic. The first call went to Naomi's number. It rang and rang. No answer. Michael hung up and immediately dialed again. Tristan pointed to another screen showing phone records in real time. He identified the second number as Detective Harris. Michael pressed the phone to his ear and started pacing. His mouth moved, but the audio was muffled. He looked scared, angry. His free hand kept running through his hair. The call lasted 47 seconds. Then Michael lowered the phone and stared at it. His whole body had gone rigid. Agents moved before Michael could leave. They came through the front door and back door at the same time. Michael spun around as 3 agents in FBI jackets surrounded him in our kitchen. Through the laptop feed, I watched my husband's face change. Shock first. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened. Then fear. Real, raw fear that made him take a step backward. One of the agents said something and Michael's expression shifted again. He went blank, calculated, like he was shutting down everything inside and putting on a mask. They told him to put his hands behind his back. Michael complied without fighting. The handcuffs clicked into place. An agent started reading him his rights. Michael's face stayed empty, but his hands were shaking. I could see them trembling even through the screen. They led him out through the front door, past Sophie's bike in the garage, past the flower bed I'd planted last spring. Michael kept his head down as they put him in an unmarked car. The whole arrest took less than 3 minutes. Tristan closed his laptop and turned to me. He explained they were taking Michael to the federal building in Manhattan for processing and interrogation. I asked what would happen next. Tristan said Michael had already requested his attorney. He wouldn't say anything without a lawyer present, but they didn't need his confession. The phone records were clear. The financial information showed every payment. The messages between Michael and Naomi laid out the entire plan. The backup killer's testimony would seal it. They had everything they needed to bury him. I sat back in my chair. Michael was in custody. The man who'd tried to have me killed was finally caught. But I didn't feel relieved. I felt hollow. 12 years of marriage had just ended with my husband in handcuffs. Skylar arrived that afternoon with a stack of folders. She sat across from me at a table and opened the top file. Federal charges, she said. Conspiracy to commit murder for hire, wire fraud, insurance fraud. The state prosecutor was filing attempted murder charges at the same time. Michael would face both federal and state courts. Skylar explained the charges in detail. The conspiracy charge carried a maximum sentence of 10 years. Wire fraud could add another 20. Insurance fraud, another 10. The state attempted murder charge could mean 25 to life. Michael was looking at decades in prison if convicted on all counts. Skylar told me Michael's bail hearing was scheduled for tomorrow morning. I would need to testify via video link. She wanted to prepare me for what to expect. Michael's attorney would argue for bail. They'd claim he had ties to the community, a stable job, a young daughter. Skylar planned to destroy every argument by showing the judge exactly what Michael had done. The premeditation, the multiple hired killers, the willingness to orphan his own child for money. The next morning, I sat in a small room at the FBI office with a camera pointed at me. A monitor showed the courtroom in Manhattan. I could see Michael sitting at a table with his attorney. He wore an orange jumpsuit. His hair was messy. He had dark circles under his eyes. This was the first time I'd seen him since he kissed me goodbye before my Seattle trip. 3 days ago. A lifetime ago. The judge called the hearing to order. Skylar stood and explained why I was testifying remotely. Security concerns for the victim. The judge nodded and asked me to state my name for the record. My voice shook as I answered. Catherine Hoffman. They asked me to describe what happened. I told them everything. How Naomi showed me the messages. How Michael had planned my murder for 6 weeks. How he'd forged my signature on a life insurance policy. How he'd sent a backup killer when the first one didn't respond. Michael wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes down on the table in front of him. His jaw was clenched tight. I described finding out my husband of 12 years wanted me dead. How he'd arranged an alibi. How he'd corrupted a detective to cover his tracks. My testimony lasted 20 minutes. When I finished, the judge thanked me. Michael still hadn't looked up. His attorney stood next. Ricardo Hendricks. Expensive suit. Smooth voice. He argued that Michael had strong ties to the community. A successful business. A 7-year-old daughter who needed her father. Michael had never been arrested before. He wasn't a flight risk. He deserved the opportunity to await trial at home with his family. Ricardo made it sound reasonable, like Michael was just a regular guy who'd made a mistake. Skylar stood up before the judge could respond. She pulled out printed copies of the messages between Michael and Naomi. She read them aloud in the courtroom. Target Catherine Hoffman. Make it look like robbery gone wrong. Half payment now, half after confirmation. She showed the judge the forged insurance policy, the cryptocurrency payments, the backup killer's testimony. Then Skylar said something that made my throat tight. She pointed out that Michael was willing to orphan his daughter for $2.3 million. He'd planned to make Sophie grow up without a mother so he could collect insurance money. That wasn't a man with family ties. That was a man who viewed his family as financial assets. The judge's expression hardened as Skylar spoke. The judge looked directly at Michael. He called him a flight risk and a danger to me. Bail was denied. Michael would remain in federal custody until trial. The guards stood and moved toward Michael. They told him to stand. He got to his feet slowly. As they led him toward the door, Michael finally looked at the video screen. His eyes met mine through the camera. I couldn't read his expression. It might have been remorse. It might have been regret that his plan failed. It might have been nothing at all. Then he was gone. The door closed behind him. The screen went blank. I sat alone in the small room at the FBI office. My husband was in jail. My marriage was over. My daughter's father was going to prison for trying to kill me. I put my head in my hands and tried to breathe. Tristan called me back to the FBI office the next afternoon. He sat across from me in the same conference room where I'd first told my story and explained that Detective Harris had been arrested at the same time they took Michael into custody. The timing was planned, so neither man could warn the other. Harris had been caught accepting a payment of $15,000 that traced back to Michael's cryptocurrency account. The money was supposed to cover Harris's role in steering any investigation away from Michael if my body turned up. Tristan showed me bank records and text messages between Harris and Michael going back 3 months. Harris had agreed to handle the case personally, plant evidence suggesting robbery, and make sure no one looked too closely at Michael's alibi or finances. The corruption charges against Harris were growing as investigators dug deeper into his past cases. They'd found evidence of other crimes he'd covered up, other payments he'd accepted, other families he'd failed while collecting money under the table. Internal Affairs was building a case that would put him away for decades. I asked Tristan what would happen to the families Harris had betrayed, the cases he'd buried. Tristan said they were reopening investigations and contacting victims. Some cases were too old to prosecute, but the families deserved to know the truth. Harris had been dirty for years, and Michael had just been his latest client. 2 days later, Tristan told me I could go home. They'd arrested the backup killer and secured my house. 2 agents would maintain surveillance outside 24 hours a day until Michael's trial was over. I packed the few belongings I'd brought to the safe house and got into an unmarked car. The drive back felt longer than it should have. When we pulled into my driveway, everything looked normal from the outside. The lawn needed mowing. The mailbox was full. The blue shutters Michael had painted last spring looked cheerful in the afternoon sun. I walked through the front door and felt sick. This was where the backup killer had waited for me to come home and die. This was where Michael had kissed me goodbye before his Chicago trip, knowing I'd never return. I walked through the living room, touching furniture Michael had helped me pick out. I went upstairs to our bedroom and stared at the bed we'd shared for 12 years while he planned my murder. Sophie's room was exactly how she'd left it before going to my mother's house. Stuffed animals on the bed, drawings taped to the walls, a puzzle half finished on her desk. Michael had been willing to leave her without a mother for insurance money. He'd been willing to make her grow up wondering why mommy never came home. I opened her closet and saw the matching swimsuits she'd been so excited about last summer. The photo on my office desk that made Naomi change her mind. I sat on Sophie's bed holding her favorite stuffed rabbit and tried to figure out how to explain this to a 7-year-old. My mother brought Sophie home 3 days later. I watched through the window as they pulled into the driveway. Sophie jumped out of the car holding a drawing she'd made. My mother looked exhausted. I opened the door and Sophie ran to me shouting about the pancakes Grandma had made for breakfast. I hugged her and felt her small arms wrap around my waist. My mother carried Sophie's overnight bag inside and we exchanged a look over Sophie's head. How do you tell a child her father tried to kill her mother? Sophie wanted to show me her drawing right away. It was our family standing in front of our house. Me and Michael and Sophie holding hands. A yellow sun in the corner. I love my family written across the top in crayon. I told Sophie we needed to talk about something important. She sat on the couch swinging her legs and looking at me with Michael's eyes. I knelt in front of her and took her hands. I said Daddy had done something very bad and he wouldn't be living with us anymore. Sophie's face crumpled. She asked what he did. I said he'd hurt people and the police had to take him away. She asked when he was coming back. I said he wasn't coming back. Sophie started crying and asking if it was her fault. She said maybe if she'd been better or quieter or helped more around the house, Daddy wouldn't have left. I pulled her into my arms and promised this had nothing to do with her. I said Daddy made his own choices and none of them were her fault. She sobbed against my shoulder asking if I was going to leave too. I held her tighter and swore I would never leave her. My mother stood in the doorway crying silently. Sophie fell asleep in my arms an hour later, exhausted from crying. The next weeks moved in a blur of appointments and meetings and trying to keep Sophie's life as normal as possible. I took her to the school every morning and picked her up every afternoon. We did homework at the kitchen table. We watched movies on the couch. We read bedtime stories about princesses and dragons. Sophie asked about Michael less frequently as the days passed, but I could see the questions in her eyes. At night, she had nightmares and crawled into my bed. I held her until she fell back asleep. Skylar called twice a week with updates about the case. Michael's attorney was trying to negotiate, but the evidence was overwhelming. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks away. Skylar explained I would have to testify in person with Michael in the courtroom. She needed me to walk the judge through everything that happened. The messages, the insurance policy, the night Naomi saved me. I started meeting with a therapist twice a week to prepare for facing Michael. The therapist helped me practice staying calm while describing what he'd done. Sophie saw a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. The psychologist said Sophie was processing everything as well as could be expected. She recommended maintaining routine and letting Sophie express her feelings however they came out. Some days Sophie was angry and threw toys. Some days she was sad and wouldn't leave my side. Some days she seemed fine, and I wondered if she really understood what had happened. Skylar called one afternoon to tell me about Naomi's plea deal. Her attorney had negotiated reduced charges in exchange for her testimony against Michael. Naomi would plead guilty to conspiracy charges related to her past work, but avoid the attempted murder charge since she'd ultimately saved my life instead of ending it. Tristan had told Skylar that Naomi was cooperating beyond what was required. She'd provided information about the criminal network that connected her to Michael. Names of people who hired killers. Details about how payments were arranged. Evidence of other crimes. Tristan said Naomi seemed genuinely sorry for ever agreeing to take the job. She'd been trying to leave that life behind, and Michael's offer had seemed like one last payday before she disappeared. But seeing Sophie's photo on my desk had changed everything. Tristan thought Naomi's testimony would be powerful at the preliminary hearing. She could describe exactly how Michael hired her, what he told her to do, and why she chose to save me instead. The judge would hear firsthand from the woman Michael paid to kill me. Skylar said Naomi's credibility was strong because she had nothing to gain from testifying. She'd already taken a plea deal. She was facing prison time regardless. Her testimony would only help convict Michael, not help herself. The preliminary hearing arrived on a cold morning in November. I'd barely slept the night before. My mother came over early to stay with Sophie while I went to court. I wore a navy suit Skylar had helped me pick out. Professional but not too formal. I wanted the judge to see me as a real person, not just a victim in a case file. Tristan met me outside the courthouse and walked me through security. Reporters were waiting in the hallway, but Tristan guided me past them without stopping. We entered the courtroom and I saw Michael for the first time in person, since learning he'd tried to have me killed. He sat at a table with Ricardo wearing an orange jumpsuit. His hair was messy and he had dark circles under his eyes. He looked smaller than I remembered. Exhausted. Nothing like the confident man who'd kissed me goodbye before his Chicago conference. The man who'd packed my suitcase and encouraged me to have a good trip. The judge entered and everyone stood. My legs felt shaky. Skylar squeezed my arm and whispered that I was going to do great. The judge called the hearing to order and asked me to take the stand. I walked to the witness box on legs that barely held me. The bailiff asked me to raise my right hand and swear to tell the truth. My voice cracked when I answered. The judge asked me to state my name for the record. Catherine Hoffman. Skylar stood and began asking questions. She asked me to describe my marriage to Michael. I talked about 12 years together. About Sophie. About what I thought was a normal, happy life. Skylar asked about the insurance policy. I explained I'd never signed it, never knew it existed until Naomi showed me the documents. Skylar asked me to describe the night of my kidnapping. I told the judge everything. How Naomi had picked me up from the airport. How she'd shown me the messages from Michael. How he'd planned my murder for 6 weeks. How he'd arranged an alibi. How he'd sent a backup killer when Naomi didn't respond. I described seeing the live feed of my house with the backup killer waiting inside. I described learning my husband had corrupted a detective to cover his tracks. My testimony lasted 2 hours. Skylar asked me to read some of Michael's messages aloud. Target Catherine Hoffman. Make it look like robbery gone wrong. Half payment now, half after confirmation. My voice shook, but I kept reading. The judge's expression hardened as she listened. Ricardo cross-examined me, trying to suggest I was mistaken or exaggerating. He asked if Michael had ever threatened me directly. I said no, he'd hired other people to do it for him. Ricardo asked if I was sure Michael actually intended to go through with the plan. I looked at Michael and said he'd paid 2 different people to kill me and forged my signature for insurance money. So yes, I was sure. Naomi testified after me. She walked to the stand wearing a prison jumpsuit. She looked tired but calm. Skylar asked her to describe how Michael had hired her. Naomi explained she'd been contacted through an intermediary who specialized in connecting people who needed certain services with people who provided them. Michael had requested someone professional and discreet, someone who could make a death look accidental or like a random crime. Naomi said Michael had been specific about his requirements. He wanted me killed the night I returned from Seattle because he'd be in Chicago with an alibi. He wanted it to look like a robbery. He didn't want Sophie to witness anything. He'd paid $50,000 up front with another $50,000 promised after confirmation. Skylar asked why Naomi had agreed to the job. Naomi said she'd been trying to get out of that life but needed money. One last job before disappearing. Skylar asked what changed. Naomi described going to my office to learn my routine. She'd seen the photos on my desk, me and Sophie at the beach in matching swimsuits. She said her daughter was 7 too. She couldn't make another 7-year-old grow up without a mother. She couldn't do that to Sophie. Skylar asked what Naomi did instead of killing me. Naomi described picking me up from the airport as planned, but then showing me all the evidence. The messages, the payments, the insurance policy. She'd driven me to the FBI instead of to my death. Ricardo tried to shake her testimony during cross-examination. He suggested she was lying to get a better deal. Naomi said she'd already taken a plea deal and had nothing to gain from testifying. She was going to prison regardless. She was testifying because it was the right thing to do. Ricardo asked if Michael had ever explicitly told her to kill me. Naomi pulled out her phone and read the messages aloud. Make it look like robbery gone wrong. Don't leave evidence. Text me when it's done. The courtroom was silent when she finished. The judge called a brief recess. I sat in the hallway with Skylar while Tristan brought me water. My hands were shaking. Skylar said the testimony had gone well. The evidence was overwhelming. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge announced her decision. She said the evidence clearly showed probable cause for all charges. The case would proceed to trial. She set a trial date 4 months away. Then she addressed Michael directly. She said the premeditation and planning involved in this case were deeply disturbing. She said Michael had corrupted law enforcement, hired multiple killers, and shown complete disregard for his wife's life and his daughter's well-being. She called him a danger to me and a flight risk. Bail was denied. Michael would remain in federal custody until trial. Skylar leaned over and whispered that this was the outcome we'd wanted. The guards moved toward Michael to lead him back to his cell. As they stood him up, Michael looked at me for the first time since the hearing began. Our eyes met across the courtroom. I couldn't read his expression. Maybe regret, maybe anger, maybe nothing at all. Then the guards led him through a side door and he was gone. I filed for divorce that afternoon. My attorney submitted the paperwork while I sat in her office signing documents. She explained that Michael's attorney would try to negotiate a settlement, but we had all the leverage. Michael was facing life in prison for trying to murder me. He had no bargaining position. 2 days later, Ricardo called my attorney with a settlement offer. Michael would give me everything in exchange for my agreement not to pursue additional civil claims. My attorney laughed when she told me about the call. She said Michael had nothing to offer that wasn't already mine by law. She told Ricardo that we'd see him in divorce court after the criminal trial was over. I didn't want Michael's money. I wanted him in prison where he couldn't hurt anyone else. I wanted Sophie to grow up knowing her mother had fought back and won. Sophie's teacher called 3 days after the preliminary hearing. My daughter had thrown scissors across the classroom and locked herself in the bathroom for 40 minutes. When I picked her up from the principal's office, she wouldn't look at me. She sat in the car with her arms crossed, staring out the window while I drove. I scheduled an appointment with her child psychologist that same afternoon. The therapist's office had toys scattered across the floor and drawings taped to every wall. Sophie sat on the couch picking at her fingernails while I explained what happened at the school. The psychologist asked Sophie if she wanted to talk about why she threw the scissors. Sophie said a boy in her class asked where her daddy was. She told him her daddy was in jail. The boy laughed and said that meant her daddy was bad. Sophie threw the scissors at the wall next to his head. The psychologist asked how that made Sophie feel. Sophie said she didn't know if her daddy was bad or if she was bad because half of her came from him. I felt my chest tighten. The therapist spent the next hour explaining to Sophie that her father's choices belonged to him alone. She drew pictures showing how people make their own decisions regardless of who their parents are. Sophie asked if it was okay to be mad at her daddy. The therapist said it was okay to feel anything she needed to feel. Mad, sad, confused, all of it at once. I increased Sophie's sessions to twice a week starting that day. The call came from a blocked number 2 weeks later. A man's voice said Detective Harris wanted to speak with me. He said Harris felt terrible about everything and wanted a chance to apologize and explain his side. I hung up. The phone rang again 5 minutes later. Same blocked number. I didn't answer. Tristan called me an hour after the second attempt. He'd been monitoring any contact attempts from Harris or his associates. He said this was a standard intimidation tactic. Harris wanted to gauge my resolve and see if I'd engage outside official channels. Tristan told me to refuse all contact. Anything Harris wanted to say could be said in court under oath. I blocked the number and filed a report about the contact attempt. Skylar used it to file a motion restricting Harris from any direct or indirect communication with me. The judge granted it the next day. The forensic accountant requested another meeting 3 weeks after that. He spread documents across Skylar's conference table showing bank statements, credit card records, and loan applications. Michael's gambling debts exceeded $680,000. He owed money to 3 different casinos in Atlantic City. He had personal loans from individuals whose names appeared in organized crime databases. The accountant showed me payment demands Michael received in the months before he hired Naomi. One message said he had until September, or they'd come after his family. Another showed a photo of our house with the words, "We know where they live," underneath. The life insurance money would have cleared every debt and left Michael with over $1 million. Instead, he was facing 40 years in federal prison. The accountant said the people Michael owed money to were now his problem in prison. Inmates with gambling debts to organized crime rarely served their full sentences. I realized Michael might not survive long enough to see parole. The doorbell rang on a Saturday morning 6 weeks after the preliminary hearing. I looked through the peephole and saw Michael's parents standing on my porch. His mother was crying. His father had his arm around her shoulders. I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. Michael's mother started talking immediately. She said their son was sick. He needed help, not prison. She begged me to consider that the gambling addiction had destroyed his judgment. His father said Michael made terrible mistakes, but he was still Sophie's father. I told them their son hired 2 different people to kill me. I showed them the scar on my wrist from where I'd broken my heel kicking the cab window. I said Michael planned my murder for 6 weeks while kissing me goodnight and helping Sophie with her homework. Michael's mother sobbed that he must have had a breakdown. I said a breakdown doesn't involve cryptocurrency payments and forged insurance policies. His father asked what I wanted them to do. I said they could visit their son in prison and explain to him what he'd done to their granddaughter. Then I closed the door. They rang the bell 4 more times. I didn't answer. Skylar called me to her office the following week. She had documents from Ricardo's discovery responses showing Michael's planned defense strategy. They were going to argue he'd suffered a mental breakdown from financial stress and wasn't thinking clearly when he hired Naomi. Ricardo had already retained a psychiatrist who would testify about how gambling addiction affects decision-making and impulse control. The defense would claim Michael never intended to actually go through with killing me. He was just trying to scare me or create some kind of backup plan in case his debts became unmanageable. Skylar said the premeditation evidence was too strong for that defense to work. Michael had researched hired killers for 3 weeks before contacting anyone. He'd specifically chosen the night I'd be returning from Seattle. He'd ensured Sophie was with my mother. He'd paid $50,000 up front and arranged another $50,000 upon completion. She showed me timeline documents proving Michael had made deliberate, calculated decisions over an extended period. No jury would believe that was a momentary lapse in judgment. I started the administrative process of removing Michael from everything the next day. I called the bank and had his name removed from our joint checking and savings accounts. I contacted the insurance company and canceled the policy Michael had forged, then took out a new policy with only my name. I went to Sophie's school and updated all emergency contact forms to remove Michael and add my mother as the primary backup. I changed the beneficiaries on my retirement accounts. I updated my will. Each phone call felt like erasing 12 years of my life, one document at a time. The bank representative asked if I was going through a divorce. I said my husband tried to have me killed. She processed the paperwork without any more questions. The school secretary hugged me when I explained why Michael's name needed to be removed from everything. She said she'd make sure he was flagged in their system as unauthorized to pick up Sophie or access any information about her. Ricardo called Skylar 3 months before the trial date. Michael was willing to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder for hire in exchange for 15 years in federal prison, instead of facing trial on all charges. He'd waive his right to appeal. The state would drop the attempted murder charges. Skylar told me the decision was partly mine because I was the victim. She said prosecutors usually make these decisions independently, but she wanted my input given the circumstances. She explained that 15 years was a significant sentence. Michael would be in his 50s when he got out. But if we went to trial and won, he'd likely get 40 years or more. The risk was that trials are unpredictable. Juries sometimes surprise everyone. I asked what she thought we should do. Skylar said she believed we'd win at trial. The evidence was overwhelming. But I'd have to testify again in much more detail. Michael's attorney would cross-examine me for hours trying to find inconsistencies. The trial would take weeks and force me to relive everything repeatedly. I met with Skylar again 2 days later to discuss the plea offer. We sat in her office going through the pros and cons. 15 years was certain. Michael would be locked up through Sophie's teenage years and most of her 20s. She wouldn't have to worry about him showing up at her graduation or wedding. But 40 years meant Michael would likely die in prison. He'd never have a chance to rebuild a relationship with Sophie or manipulate her as an adult. Skylar said trials are gambles. She'd seen cases with better evidence than ours result in acquittals because one juror decided they didn't trust the prosecution. She'd also seen weaker cases get maximum sentences because the jury was horrified by the defendant's actions. She believed our case was strong enough to risk trial. The cryptocurrency payments, the forged insurance policy, the backup killer, Naomi's testimony, all of it painted a clear picture of premeditated attempted murder. I asked how long the trial would take. She said probably 3 weeks, including jury selection. I'd be on the stand for at least 2 full days. Maybe more if Ricardo was thorough. I decided to reject the plea deal that same afternoon. I told Skylar I wanted Michael to face the full consequences of trying to murder me. I was willing to testify as many times as necessary. I wanted a jury to hear every detail of what he'd done and how he'd planned it. 15 years felt like letting him off easy. Skylar seemed relieved by my decision. She said she'd been hoping I'd choose trial because she wanted to prosecute this case fully. She promised to build the strongest case possible. She'd prepare me thoroughly for testimony. She'd anticipate every angle Ricardo might use. She'd make sure the jury understood exactly what Michael had done and why he deserved the maximum sentence. I signed the paperwork rejecting the plea offer. Ricardo filed a motion asking the judge to reconsider, claiming Michael was willing to accept responsibility. The judge denied it. The trial date remained set for January. Naomi's sentencing hearing was scheduled for December, 1 month before Michael's trial. I told Skylar I wanted to attend and provide a victim impact statement. Skylar helped me write it. I described the night Naomi picked me up from the airport and how my entire world shattered when she showed me Michael's messages. I explained how she'd saved my life by choosing to drive me to the FBI instead of killing me. I acknowledged that she'd agreed to take the job initially, but her final decision to protect me and cooperate with investigators had made all the difference. The hearing took place in the same courthouse where Michael's preliminary hearing had happened. Naomi sat at the defense table wearing an orange jumpsuit. She looked thinner than I remembered. Her attorney argued for leniency based on her cooperation and the fact that she'd ultimately done the right thing. The prosecutor acknowledged Naomi's assistance had been crucial to building the case against Michael. When my turn came, I walked to the podium and read my statement. I said Naomi had shown me that people can change their minds even in the darkest moments. Her choice to save me had given Sophie her mother. The judge listened carefully to everything. She said Naomi's past crimes couldn't be ignored, but her cooperation and final decision to protect me demonstrated genuine remorse. She sentenced Naomi to 5 years in federal prison with credit for the 8 months she'd already served. With good behavior and her cooperation agreement, Naomi would likely serve less than 3 years total. As the guards led Naomi away, she looked at me and mouthed the words, "Thank you." After the hearing, Naomi walked toward me in the courthouse hallway. The guards let her approach because she wasn't in handcuffs anymore, just supervised. She stopped a few feet away and looked at the floor. Her voice came out quiet when she finally spoke. She said she was sorry for agreeing to take the job in the first place. She said she knew that didn't fix anything, but she needed me to hear it directly from her. I looked at this woman who was supposed to kill me and felt something complicated that I couldn't quite name. I told her I was grateful she made the right choice when it mattered. I said I couldn't forget what she was willing to do for money, but her final decision gave Sophie her mother back. Naomi nodded and wiped her eyes. The guard touched her shoulder and she turned to leave. I watched her walk away and wondered if I'd ever fully understand what happened in her mind that night. The trial started on a cold morning in January. I arrived at the courthouse at 7:30, even though proceedings didn't begin until 9. The building was already packed with reporters who shouted questions as I walked past them. Camera flashes went off in my face and someone asked how I felt about facing my husband. I kept my head down and pushed through the crowd. My mother met me inside the security checkpoint. She squeezed my hand and we found seats in the front row of the courtroom. The room filled up quickly with journalists, court watchers, and people I didn't recognize. Michael was brought in wearing a dark suit that made him look like he was going to a business meeting instead of fighting murder charges. He didn't look at me. Skylar entered and set up her materials at the prosecution table. She glanced back at me and gave a small nod. The judge entered and everyone stood. The jury filed in and took their seats. Skylar stood to deliver her opening statement. She walked to the center of the courtroom and began describing how Michael planned and paid for my murder. She laid out the timeline starting with the forged insurance policy in March. She explained how Michael found Naomi through criminal contacts and hired her to kill me on a specific night when he had an airtight alibi. She described the cryptocurrency payments, the detailed instructions, and the backup killer Michael hired when Naomi didn't respond. Her voice stayed calm and clear as she explained how Michael tried to use a corrupt detective to cover up the crime if anything went wrong. The jury watched her with complete attention. Some of them glanced at Michael with expressions I couldn't read. Skylar finished by saying the evidence will prove beyond any doubt that Michael Hoffman tried to murder his wife for money. The second day of trial arrived and I was scheduled to testify. I sat in the witness waiting room until they called my name. Walking into the courtroom felt like entering a different dimension. I took the stand and placed my hand on the Bible. The oath sounded distant in my ears. Skylar approached and began asking questions about my marriage to Michael. I described our 12 years together, how we met, when Sophie was born. She asked about our financial situation, and I explained that I thought everything was fine. I had no idea Michael was hiding gambling debts or struggling with his business. Skylar showed me the insurance policy and asked if I ever signed it. I said no and explained that the signature isn't even close to mine. She asked me to describe the night I landed at the airport. I told the jury about getting in Naomi's car, about realizing something was wrong when she drove past my exit. I described the moment she showed me Michael's messages planning my murder. My voice shook, but I kept talking. I explained how Naomi drove me to the FBI instead of killing me. Skylar asked how I felt reading those messages from my husband. I said I couldn't breathe, that my entire world shattered in that moment. I described seeing the backup killer waiting in my house on the live security feed. The jury leaned forward in their seats. Some of them looked at Michael with disgust. His attorney stood for cross-examination. Ricardo walked toward me with a sympathetic expression that felt fake. He suggested maybe I misunderstood the messages or that Naomi manipulated me somehow. He asked if Michael and I had been fighting before my trip. I said no. Everything seemed normal. He implied I might be exaggerating to get attention or sympathy. Skylar objected and the judge sustained it. Ricardo asked if I have any proof Michael actually wanted me dead, besides some text messages. I stared at him and said the cryptocurrency payments, the forged insurance policy, and the man waiting in my house with zip ties seemed like pretty good proof. The courtroom stayed silent. Ricardo had no response to that. I spent 6 total hours on the stand answering questions from both sides. When I finally stepped down, my legs barely held me up. Ricardo's defense strategy became clear over the next few days. He focused heavily on Michael's mental state and financial desperation. He brought in a psychologist who testified about how extreme stress can impair judgment and decision-making. The psychologist described Michael as a man who made terrible choices under crushing pressure. Ricardo painted Michael as someone who spiraled into panic rather than calculated murder. He suggested Michael never really intended to go through with killing me. But then Skylar played recordings of Michael's phone calls. The jury heard Michael calling Naomi's number repeatedly after I was supposed to be dead. They heard him leave a voicemail asking for confirmation. His voice sounded calm and businesslike, not panicked or regretful. They heard him call the backup killer and ask if the job got done. Any sympathy that might have existed in the courtroom disappeared completely. Several jury members looked physically sick. One woman in the back row shook her head in disbelief. Michael sat perfectly still at the defense table, but I noticed his jaw clenching. The prosecution called their next witness, and the backup killer walked into the courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit. He took a plea deal in exchange for his testimony. He sat in the witness box, and Skylar asked him to describe his arrangement with Michael. He explained that Michael contacted him through an intermediary after Naomi stopped responding. Michael offered him $30,000 to finish the job if the first attempt failed. The backup killer described going to my house and waiting for news that I was dead. He said Michael sent him my address, a photo of me, and instructions to make it look like a robbery. Skylar asked what he planned to do when I came home. He said he was supposed to kill me with a knife and take some valuables to stage a break-in. The jury looked horrified. Ricardo tried to suggest the backup killer was lying to reduce his own sentence. But Skylar produced text messages between Michael and the backup killer that matched his testimony exactly. She showed the jury payment records proving Michael sent him $15,000 up front. This destroyed any remaining argument that Michael wasn't serious about killing me. The backup killer's testimony made it clear that Michael had multiple plans in place and was determined to see me dead. Frank took the stand as part of his own plea agreement. He admitted he agreed to steer any investigation away from Michael if I turned up dead. He described meeting Michael at a bar 6 months before my planned murder. Michael approached him because someone had recommended Frank as a detective who could be bought. Frank said Michael paid him $10,000 to make sure no one looked too closely at my death. He was supposed to push the robbery narrative and discourage any investigation into Michael's finances or activities. Skylar asked if Frank had any hesitation about helping cover up a murder. Frank looked at his hands and said he needed the money, and convinced himself it wouldn't actually happen. His testimony revealed a broader corruption network within the police department. He named 2 other detectives who've taken similar arrangements. But right now, the focus stayed on how Michael tried to use a dirty cop to get away with murder. Ricardo asked Frank why the jury should believe anything he says given his admitted corruption. Frank said he has nothing left to lose by telling the truth now. The plea agreement is already signed and his career is over. He gains nothing by lying. His testimony added another layer to Michael's planning and showed how carefully he tried to cover every angle. Ricardo put Michael on the stand in what felt like a last desperate move. Michael took the oath and sat down looking composed. Ricardo asked him to explain his version of events. Michael claimed he never meant for anyone to actually kill me. He said he was just trying to scare me or get my attention somehow. He suggested the messages to Naomi were just talk, that he was venting frustration about our financial problems. He said he never thought Naomi would take him seriously. Ricardo asked about the payments. Michael claimed those were for something else entirely, and the timing was coincidental. Several jury members rolled their eyes. Skylar stood for cross-examination, and her expression was sharp. She asked Michael to explain exactly how hiring someone to kill his wife was supposed to scare her. Michael stumbled over his words. Skylar showed him the detailed messages again, reading them out loud. She pointed out how he specified the exact flight, the time, the method. She asked if that sounds like someone who's just venting. Michael said he was confused and not thinking clearly. Skylar showed him the backup killer's testimony and asked if hiring a second person was also just venting. She displayed the payment records showing multiple transactions totaling nearly $100,000. She asked what else he could possibly have been paying for. Michael had no good answer. Skylar asked why he called repeatedly to confirm my death if he never wanted me dead in the first place. She played the recordings again. Michael's story fell apart completely under her questioning. He contradicted himself multiple times and couldn't explain away the physical evidence. By the time Skylar finished, Michael looked defeated, and the jury looked convinced of his guilt. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. I sat in the courthouse cafeteria with my mother and Skylar, drinking bad coffee and trying not to think about what happens if they don't convict. Skylar assured me the evidence was overwhelming, but I'd learned that nothing was certain. Finally, the bailiff came to tell us the jury had reached a verdict. We filed back into the courtroom and took our seats. The jury entered and I tried to read their faces, but they gave nothing away. The judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. The 4 persons stood and said yes. The clerk read the charges one by one. Conspiracy to commit murder for hire. The 4 persons said guilty. Wire fraud. Guilty. Insurance fraud. Guilty. Attempted murder. Guilty. Michael showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but I saw his hands shaking on the table in front of him. The judge thanked the jury and set sentencing for 2 weeks later. Guards led Michael away, and he finally looked at me. I stared back without expression. My mother hugged me and I realized I was crying. 2 weeks passed in a blur of relief and exhaustion. Skylar told me Michael was facing 40 years to life based on the federal sentencing guidelines and state charges. She walked me through what to expect at sentencing and helped me prepare my victim impact statement. I wrote and rewrote it dozens of times, trying to capture what Michael's betrayal cost me. The sentencing hearing arrived and the courtroom was packed again. I sat in the front row holding my mother's hand. Michael was brought in wearing his orange jumpsuit. The judge asked if anyone wished to speak before sentencing. I stood and walked to the podium. My hands shook as I unfolded my statement. I described how Michael's betrayal destroyed my ability to trust anyone. I explained how Sophie asks questions about her father that I don't know how to answer. I talked about the nightmares and the therapy and the constant fear that someone else might try to finish what Michael started. I described having to sell our house because I couldn't sleep in rooms where he planned my murder. I told the judge that Michael didn't just try to kill me physically, he killed the person I used to be. The woman who trusted her husband and believed in their marriage died the night Naomi showed me those messages. I'm rebuilding my life from nothing because Michael decided I was worth more dead than alive. The judge listened carefully to every word. When I finished, she thanked me and asked Michael if he had anything to say. Michael stood and apologized in a flat voice that sounded rehearsed. He said he was sorry for the pain he caused. The judge cut him off and said his actions speak louder than his words. She reviewed the evidence and the jury's verdict. She described Michael's crime as a calculated betrayal of the worst kind. She sentenced him to 50 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Michael would be 78 years old before he's eligible for release. The guards led him away, and I watched him disappear through the courthouse doors, knowing I never have to see him again unless I choose to. My mother wrapped her arms around me in the courthouse hallway while tears ran down my face. I wasn't crying for Michael or the marriage that turned out to be a lie. I was crying for the version of myself who trusted completely, who believed in forever, who never imagined the man sleeping beside her was planning her murder. Karen held me tighter and whispered that it was over now, that I was safe, that we could start rebuilding. Other people moved past us in the hallway, lawyers and defendants and families caught up in their own legal battles. None of them knew what just happened in that courtroom, how a judge just sentenced my husband to 50 years for trying to have me killed. We walked outside into cold February air, and I felt lighter somehow, like a weight I'd been carrying for months finally lifted. The divorce paperwork arrived at my lawyer's office 4 weeks after Michael's sentencing. I signed every page without reading the details because I already knew what they said. Full custody of Sophie with no visitation rights for Michael due to his criminal convictions. His name removed from her birth certificate per my request, erasing him legally from her life the way he tried to erase me permanently from his. The lawyer explained the protective orders that prevented Michael from contacting either of us, even from prison. No letters, no phone calls, no messages through third parties. Sophie was legally protected from any attempt he might make to reach her. I took copies of everything and put them in a fireproof safe at my mother's house, documentation that my daughter was mine alone now. The realtor came to evaluate our house on a Tuesday morning while Sophie was at school. She walked through rooms where Michael and I lived for 8 years, where we celebrated birthdays and holidays and pretended to be a normal family. I couldn't stay there anymore. Every corner held memories that felt poisoned now, moments I thought were real, but were just Michael playing a role while planning my death. The master bedroom where he held me and told me he loved me. The kitchen where he made breakfast and asked about my day. The living room where the backup killer waited in darkness, ready to finish what Michael started. The realtor suggested a price, and I told her to list it immediately. I didn't care about getting top dollar. I just needed to leave this place behind. Sophie and I moved into a smaller house 3 blocks from my mother's place in early April. The new house had big windows that let in lots of light and a backyard with an old swing set the previous owners left behind. Sophie picked out paint colors for her new room, choosing bright yellow walls and white furniture that felt nothing like her old bedroom. We spent weekends unpacking boxes and arranging furniture, creating spaces that belonged only to us. She hung posters of her favorite cartoon characters and arranged her stuffed animals on new shelves. I watched her run through the empty rooms, her laughter echoing off bare walls, and I realized she was already making this place feel like home. The house felt safer somehow, like Michael's shadow couldn't reach us here. Sophie's therapist called me after their session on a Thursday afternoon to say she was making real progress. The nightmares were less frequent now, maybe once or twice a week instead of every night. She was smiling more at school and playing with friends during recess instead of sitting alone. The therapist explained that children are remarkably resilient, that while Michael's betrayal would always be part of Sophie's story, it didn't have to define her entire life. She was learning that what her father did was about his choices, not about her worth or lovability. I felt relief wash over me hearing this, knowing my daughter would be okay eventually. The therapist suggested we continue weekly sessions for now, but thought Sophie was developing healthy coping mechanisms. I started my own therapy in May, finally ready to deal with the damage Michael's betrayal caused. My therapist was a woman in her 50s who specialized in trauma and trust issues. She helped me understand that I wasn't stupid for missing the warning signs, that Michael was skilled at deception and manipulation. We worked on the hypervigilance that made me check locks 3 times before bed and jump at unexpected sounds. She taught me breathing exercises for when panic attacks hit, usually triggered by things like seeing black sedans or hearing men's voices that sounded like Michael's. The therapy was hard work, forcing me to examine painful memories and emotions I'd rather avoid. But slowly, week by week, I started feeling less like a victim and more like a survivor who was rebuilding her life. 6 months after Michael's sentencing, I got a call from a nonprofit organization that helped domestic violence survivors navigate legal systems. They were looking for someone with first-hand experience to join their team as a victim advocate. The director explained that my story, surviving a murder-for-hire plot and successfully prosecuting my husband, made me uniquely qualified to help other women who were facing dangerous situations. The work would involve accompanying survivors to court hearings, helping them understand legal processes and connecting them with resources. I thought about how terrified I was that night in the FBI office, how much I needed someone who understood what I was going through. I accepted the position immediately. Using my experience to help others gave me a sense of purpose beyond just surviving what Michael did to me. A letter arrived from the women's prison upstate in September, Naomi's handwriting on the envelope. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won. She wrote about the therapy and rehabilitation programs she was participating in, describing how she was working to understand what led her to accept jobs killing people for money. She included information about her daughter, who was 8 now, living with Naomi's sister and doing well in school. Naomi said she thought about that night constantly, how close she came to destroying both our families. She thanked me for my victim impact statement at her sentencing, saying I showed her more grace than she deserved. I wrote back carefully, maintaining clear boundaries but acknowledging that her choice to save me gave both Sophie and her daughter their mothers. I didn't forgive her for being willing to kill me, but I was grateful she changed her mind. Sophie and I developed new Saturday morning routines that were just ours, making pancakes together while listening to music in the kitchen. She stood on a step stool to help me mix batter, getting flour on her nose and giggling when I wiped it off. We had movie nights every Wednesday where she picked the film and we made popcorn and built blanket forts in the living room. At bedtime, I told her stories where she was always the hero, saving kingdoms and solving mysteries and being brave. She was learning that family doesn't require a father to be complete and happy, that the two of us together are enough. Sometimes she asked questions about Michael, and I answered them honestly but simply, explaining that he made very bad choices that hurt people. She seemed to accept this, moving on to talk about school or friends or what she wanted for her birthday. My mother found a house for sale on our street in October and bought it without hesitation. She moved in 3 weeks later, close enough that Sophie could walk to her grandmother's house after school. Karen helped with homework and made dinner on nights when I worked late at the nonprofit. Having her nearby made me feel less alone in this new life I was building. Sophie loved having her grandmother so close, running over to show her artwork from school or to ask for help with craft projects. The 3 of us had dinner together most evenings, a small family that worked because we chose each other. My mother never said I told you so about Michael, never mentioned the concerns she had about him that she kept to herself. She just showed up every day, steady and supportive, helping us build something stable. I met someone in November through a friend who knew my whole story and set us up carefully. His name was James, and he worked as a teacher at the elementary school 2 towns over. We met for coffee first, nothing fancy, just talking and getting to know each other. I told him about Michael and the trial on our second date, because I needed him to know what he was getting into. James listened without judgment, then shared his own story about a difficult divorce 3 years ago. We took things very slowly, just coffee dates and occasional dinners, no pressure or expectations. He was patient with my trust issues, understanding when I canceled plans because I was having a bad day or needed space. I was learning that not everyone was hiding dark secrets behind a normal appearance, that some people were genuinely kind and honest. It was terrifying and hopeful at the same time, this idea that I might be able to trust someone again eventually. A year after Michael's sentencing, Sophie and I drove to the FBI field office on a Saturday morning. She was 8 now, taller and steadier than the scared 7-year-old who had to learn her father tried to kill her mother. I parked in the visitor lot and we walked through the glass doors together, her hand in mine. Tristan met us in the lobby wearing jeans instead of his usual suit, and Sophie surprised me by running forward to hug him. He'd kept in touch over the months, checking in occasionally to see how we were doing, and I realized she saw him as someone who helped save our family. The rest of his team gathered in a conference room, the same one where I first told my story in the middle of the night. They'd stayed connected to our case even after the trial ended. following up to make sure we felt safe and supported. I thanked them for everything they did, for believing me immediately, and moving fast enough to stop Michael before he could send anyone else. Sophie presented them with a card she made herself, covered in drawings of superheroes and thank you messages in careful 8-year-old handwriting. Tristan promised to keep it on his desk, and I could tell he meant it. Seeing these people who fought to protect us reminded me that good existed alongside the darkness, that some humans dedicated their lives to helping others survive terrible things. We left the FBI office and drove to the park near our new house. Sophie ran ahead to the swings while I sat on a bench watching her. Life wasn't perfect, and some days I woke up remembering the woman who trusted Michael completely, who never imagined her husband was capable of planning her murder. Those memories hurt in a way that hadn't faded, a permanent scar on how I see the world and the people in it. But Sophie and I were building something real and safe together, a life where we made pancakes on Saturday mornings and had movie nights on Wednesdays, and told each other stories where she was always the hero. We weren't just surviving anymore, getting through each day with gritted teeth and forced smiles. We were actually living, laughing at silly jokes and making plans for the future, and learning that family doesn't require a father to be whole. Sophie called to me from the swings, asking me to watch how high she could go, and I waved back at her with genuine happiness. That felt like the best revenge against Michael's attempt to erase me, this ordinary moment of joy that he tried to steal and failed.